The first day I moved into my lakeside property, I could feel the air shift, not from the calm breeze rippling across the water or the sound of gulls echoing from the docks, but from the weight of the stares coming from every porch and every deck that lined the lake, eyes sharpened not with curiosity but with disdain, because to them, a black man moving into their community was an act of intrusion, a disruption to the perfect picture they had painted of themselves, but little did they know. Not only was I moving in with more rights than any of them could imagine, I held the very foundation of their leisure in my hands, for the docks they strutted across, where they tied their polished boats, where they held their lakefront barbecues and fishing tournaments, all of it fell under rights passed down to me from my grandfather, a man who had quietly but shrewdly secured ownership over the dock access decades earlier, a man they had dismissed as nothing more than a humble fisherman. Unaware he had stitched a legacy of power beneath their noses, and so when the HOA president, a sharp-faced woman with a voice like brittle glass and a superiority complex that could fill volumes, marched down to my property with 2 board members flanking her like palace guards, she began her rehearsed speech about community expectations, rattling off bylaws about paint shades, lawn maintenance, and most importantly, dock access fees, as though I were some tenant she could corral into obedience, her tone dripping with condescension as she warned me about violating standards, and mentioned how ownership here comes with responsibilities, but instead of anger, I felt only a calm amusement, because while she held up her clipboard like a badge of authority, I knew the truth. Those docks weren't theirs to regulate, they weren't even theirs to touch without my consent, and while they threatened fines and consequences, I silently entertained the thought of how quickly their arrogance would crumble once they realized they'd been leaning on a power structure made of sand. Sure enough, within the first week, they sent me official letters demanding I sign over partial control of my dock to the HOA, citing fairness to the community, but I laughed aloud at the audacity, because their very demand was the equivalent of squatters asking a homeowner for the keys, and by the time they escalated their tactics, sending their so-called HOA security to scold me for launching my boat too late in the evening, I was already several steps ahead, having pulled property deeds, riparian rights documents, and county records showing unequivocally that the docks fell under my jurisdiction, not theirs, and not only that, but their years of charging residents dock fees and regulating boat slips had been done without legal standing, which in legal terms amounted to fraud. The more they pushed, the deeper I dug, and when they finally summoned me to a board meeting in their sterile clubhouse, thinking they could corner me with their rules and bylaws, I walked in carrying a thick folder of documents, calm and collected, while they wore smirks of superiority, expecting me to fold like so many before me. Yet the moment I laid the deed on the table and began to read aloud the clauses granting my family exclusive dock rights, the room grew quiet, the smirks faltered, and the reality began to sink in that the very man they had tried to bully was the one person they could not afford to cross. The president stammered, tried to pivot, muttering about shared responsibilities and community trust, but I cut her off, laying it out plain, effective immediately. All dock usage required my approval, all HOA-imposed dock fees were null and void, and every dollar they had collected fraudulently over the years was now subject to refund or legal claim. And as I spoke, I watched their power unravel thread by thread, the board members who once puffed their chests now shrinking in their seats, the arrogance dissolving into panic, because they knew the truth. Without the docks, their HOA was a paper tiger, and without my consent, their entire facade of control collapsed. The irony was sweet, because in trying to strip me of rights I had always possessed, they had exposed their own illegitimacy, and word spread fast throughout the neighborhood. Whispers of the meeting carried across lawns and into households, and suddenly neighbors who had once sneered at me from their porches came shuffling to my dock with forced smiles, bearing casseroles and apologies, desperate to smooth things over because they knew their fishing weekends, their boating trips, their lakeside parties, all of it hinged on me. Yet I wasn't interested in their hollow gestures. I was interested in something deeper, respect, not the performative kind they threw around when convenient, but real respect, born from the understanding that I wasn't someone they could push around, belittle, or erase. And so I made my rules clear, firm, and fair. Dock usage would continue, but under my oversight, with safety standards enforced, maintenance done properly, and access granted equally without prejudice, meaning the petty power trips of the HOA were over. replaced by an authority they couldn't manipulate. Some residents grumbled, others resisted, but in time they adapted, because they had no choice. And slowly, the community shifted, learning that power didn't always wear a suit or carry a clipboard. Sometimes it wore the face of the man they underestimated most. The president, stripped of her crown, eventually resigned under the pressure of her own humiliated board, and as new leadership emerged, humbled and cooperative, the dynamics of the community transformed, no longer a rigid hierarchy of control but a balanced environment where everyone stood on equal footing. And though I had never sought to become the center of this lake's life, fate had placed me there. A reminder to all of them that true ownership isn't about titles, appearances, or exclusion. It's about legacy, law, and the strength to stand when others try to push you down. So as I stood on my dock one evening, watching the sunset pour gold across the water, boats drifting peacefully in the slips I now regulated, I couldn't help but smile at the irony. Because the same people who once demanded I give up my rights now needed my permission to touch what was always mine, and while they had tried to erase me, I had become inescapable, their daily lives tethered to my decisions, their comfort dependent on the man they once dismissed, and that knowledge was more satisfying than any revenge could ever be, because it wasn't born of spite, it was born of justice, the quiet, undeniable kind that rewrites the rules and leaves no room for doubt, a justice that would echo through this lake community for generations, forever reminding them that the black man they tried to chase away was the one who controlled the water under their very feet.